Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, along with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke. Jen, this is another Monday Matters. It's going to be coming out beginning of August, and so is your new book.
And so it, yes, I know.
So I was on your website today because I'm that sneaky guy that comes over and checks out your website because you have a new newsletter. And I was looking at the top of your page, and we're recording this just for, at the end of July. So this may have changed by the time this recording comes out, because I was looking at the top banner of your, and I was like, where's the new book?
I know. I have to update that. I know, and I'm glad you mentioned that because the gentleman who helps me with my website, because he's going to get a phone call today, so we're going to get that updated.
That's right. So listeners, you can go on Amazon or to ASCD's website, or eventually to Jim's website, and you're going to see this amazing book on trust. So Jen, I wanted to take some time today and in some of the Monday Matters to follow to just give you an opportunity to share some of the content from your book, Trusted, Trust Pillars, Trust Killers, and the Secret to Successful Schools by Dr. Jen Schwanke, your fifth book. And because I had the privilege of getting an advance copy and writing a review, when I wrote my review back to your editors, I told them that it's really hard for me to choose one, but I think this is my favorite. And one of the reasons it's my favorite is because I've read education books for years, but this first part of your book, Trust in Schools, Why It's Broken and How to Get It Back, is one of the best summaries of the history of school leadership and public education I've ever read in one place. So talk to us a little bit about the research that went into this part of the book and why you started there.
Well, this is exactly why I'm excited about this book. I'm really proud of this one because it is a little bit different. And to be honest, when I was going back and forth with my editor, I said, hey, I want chapter 1 to be kind of a history lesson, because in my mind, well, there's two reasons for that. One is so many of us don't know the history of education as it relates to us now. And two, there's a direct correlation with how our society and our community think about schools and what's going on in the larger world. Now, let me back up and tell you why I became interested in this. When I got my doctoral degree, I was thinking about my dissertation, and there were a lot of ways I could have gone, a lot of things that I would have been interested in studying. But in talking to my advisor, we had just read a book called The Principal's Office, and it really dove into the complexities and the history of the actual principal position. So I said, I want to write that book or a dissertation for schools in general. And he said, I think we could do that. So he took a big chance and he called the history department. And basically, I wrote a dissertation that was kind of in both departments, which was incredibly rewarding, so much fun.
Wow.
But what I found as I studied this is the line that I kept coming to was, a society reflects her ills on her schools. And by that, I mean, whenever there is political discontent, financial uncertainty, a spike in crime, issues with tensions racially, culturally, socially, the next thing that happens is parents, communities, lawmakers, they all look to the schools. And I think personally, it's an instinctual response to wanting to know that our children are okay and wanting to know that our children can fix this mess we've created, right? So when you can't be mad at something so gigantic as an entire society, you can be mad at your kid's teacher. So think of it that way, right? So if you track, and the first chapter of the book does, it tracks by 2-decade increments, things that were happening in the world that really did hurt schools and how people thought of them. So, this goes back to 1600. But when you look just in the 20th century, you think about, our country's was exploding in growth. Enrollment was growing. There was a huge curricular shift away from reading, writing, and arithmetic and toward industrialization. Then we got into the Great Depression, and there was, so much poverty and, literally life and death situations, um, divisiveness with politicians, liberal, conservative. Then we roll into the 40s and through the 60s, and we had a lot of social tension. And this, by the way, is when schools really were taken aback because the civil rights movement, Supreme Court cases such as Brown versus Board of Education, um, the equal employment acts, all of those things, schools weren't ready for that. And they weren't ready. They especially weren't ready for student rights lawsuits. So
Yeah.
when you look at the Tinker case, which many of you learned about in your graduate programs, school administrators were not ready for that. They weren't ready for students to be allowed to protest silently or not. And they weren't ready for students to have due process rights. That had never been the case before. If a principal decided a kid needed suspended, you just kicked him out and that was it. And so on. So every period in history where there has been larger societal issues, schools have struggled. And schools have struggled to maintain trust. They feel attacked as though there isn't that relationship we want with our communities. So learning all of this, I thought, my goodness, this is should be of some comfort to school leaders because I think we walk around and we lead schools and we think, this parent or that parent or, that group of parents don't trust what we're doing. And we feel really, really bad about that.
Yeah.
And it feels new and it feels like we're the only one. And so that's why I wanted to write this book, to not only give an overview of history, but to also say this isn't new. And of course, whenever there's a crisis in or conflict in a society, schools are at the other end of the microscope.
Well, thank you for that very quick summary of a very important chapter. And um, let me just respond with a couple of thoughts. One is what I really loved about this chapter, Jen, was you and I spend so much of our time. We spent so much of our time as leaders, and we work with other leaders who spend so much of their time trying to problem solve the people or systems situations right in front of them. And that is so important. But what you ask people to do was to take a step back from the ocean in which they're swimming and get a bird's eye view of that entire landscape
Right.
so that they recognize, oh, when I pull away from this historically, I can see why there's this island here and this battleship there and why
Right.
this group was created. And so one of the pages that you have that's kind of a resource page is where you take all of the initiatives that have come across the US through the centuries, but then especially when you get into the 20th century. And when you get into the time where you and I remember school, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, every decade since the 1960s, the number of initiatives just exponentially gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so if
That's right.
there's this sense of as a leader that you're like, why are we always swimming in
Yep.
initiatives and mandates and polarization and politics? And it's like, because that's exactly what you're doing.
That's exactly right.
You're trying to lead school and do school while at the same time you're just constantly having to respond to
That's
whatever
right.
it is, and the tension that's involved in that can be really stressful and can feel overwhelming.
I'm really glad you pointed that out. This is one of my most impactful, I feel, visual statements of what has happened to schools. And I actually got this. I want to make sure that I give credit where it's due. And this came from a book called "Schools Cannot Do It Alone" from an author named Jamie Vollmer, who, by the way, I did reach out and he gave permission for me to expand on his idea. And this is something I actually teach graduate classes for aspiring principals. And when I show this as a visual, their jaws drop, because just like you said, Will, in the 1600s there was one job of schools, and that was to teach young white boys a little bit of reading and a little bit of math. And then when you kind of look at the decades since, there's been more and more and more added, and by the way, nothing taken away. But this is an example of what I mean when I say a society reflects her ills on its schools. in the 60s, just as an example. That was when it was determined, our little people aren't ready for school. Okay, well, then let's require preschool. Um, let's require information about teenage pregnancy. Let's require drug education. Let's require character education. Hey, our special education students aren't really getting what they need. Let's enhance that. And just like you said, Will, just visually, when you look at even from 2010 to 2020, there's probably, I mean, I'm just kind of looking at the page right now, there's probably 30 new initiatives that were mandated by law that schools incorporate into their curriculum, into their resources, into their everyday activities. And I mean, no wonder we feel like we're drowning. And yet, when spread so thin, and when people are watching every dime that we spend, because we're in most parts public entities, no wonder questions come up, not only internally but from our communities as well.
Yeah. And you're not alone in this assessment. I was sitting in a meeting probably 10 years ago, Jen, in Washington, D.C., near Georgetown. It was with an event with the National Association of Secondary School Principals, and they had invited a researcher who had spent 18 months researching the work of the principal. And he shared a lot of things about advocacy, but in regulation and in policy and pipelines. And then he opened it up for questions. And so I raised my hand and I said, "What surprised you after studying us for 18 months? Because you gave us a really great summary of the challenges." And he said, "What surprised me was I can't even imagine another occupation where someone every single day is trying to decide what laws do I keep or break just
Yes.
to be able to respond to all of the different initiatives that are sitting in front of me from the state, federal, local." And he said, "I just applaud you guys that you can even do your work
Right.
with that kind of." And I thought, well, first of all, when he said that, I was like, wow, thanks for saying that out loud. And then two, kudos, brothers and sisters. that,
Right.
because here's the other thing I want to say too, Jen. None of this is to make anybody feel like we can't do school. Because I also sit by people on airplanes sometimes when I tell them what I do, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry,"
Right.
because oh, because schools are so broken. And then I'll say, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! Have you have you ever met my friend Tracy Swilly? Have you ever
Right.
met my friend Donna Hayward? Have you ever met my friend Lewis Bradford?" And I'm naming people that listen to this show and friends of ours right now that have high performing schools, sometimes in really tough situations. And the list goes on and on and on, Jen, where I've
Right.
seen schools still perform in the midst of
Right.
really, really difficult situations. So this is your chapter where you set up the cultural landscape, though, so that we understand.
Right.
The aha moment in this
Right.
chapter is, this is why it's not just my own trust,
Right.
not just the trust of that parent on the other side of me. It's not just the kid in front of me.
Right.
I need to do that, but I need to do it with this perspective that this is the cultural world and political world that we live in while we're doing this.
Right. Well, and I think about those people sitting next to you on the airplane, and this is one of the things that is so disheartening for school leaders. A parent might have gotten in a little bit of a tussle with a teacher over a kid cheating on a test, or a throwaway comment that a substitute may have made that was hurtful, whatever. And many times it feels like parents will say, "See, all the schools are a mess. They're all broken because I had this situation." I just had that conversation. I went on a trip with my college roommates. We do it every year. And, inevitably, some evening there's a conversation. I'm the only educator in the room, which is usually a relief, except when they'll tell a story. My son had this teacher that said this one thing. And it's told as though, "See, it's all broken."
Uh-huh.
And I'll think, in a 13-year tenure, if you have 5 situations where it didn't go all that great, that's not very much. And we are in a human business. We're working with humans. Mistakes are made, but there's very little forgiveness out there right now from legislators, from parents, from communities, from the media. There's very
Mhm.
little cutting educators slack, and that can really wear us down. And so my attempt with this book was to set up, as you said, set the stage for why this happens and how it has happened in the past. And then I ask readers in this first chapter to really visualize what a culture of trust looks like.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean perfection. It means thinking about things such as, respect, holding people accountable, and upholding community standards.
Mhm.
Understanding we're part of a team. Nobody should be working alone and certainly not feel like they're working alone. Accepting feedback, owning our responsibilities. So, you can adopt Jen Schwanke's visualization of a culture of respect or write your own.
Mhm.
Either way, I think that we first have to visualize in order to achieve.
Well done, Jen, because in Principal Matters listeners, I really want you to get a copy of Jen's new book, not just because Jen's my friend and I love promoting her work, but because I think you're going to find it, first of all, just really helpful for the context. But then you immediately go from that into, okay, let's now visualize what
Right.
cultures of trust look like, even with the realities that we're facing historically and presently. And guess what? Those cultures of trust are exactly what you just said. And we have responsibilities as leaders. Our teachers have responsibilities. Our students have responsibilities. We can cultivate those attitudes and behaviors of trust, even in the midst of
Right.
the challenges. And I just like to be reminded about that, Jen, because it's so easy to despair. It's
Right.
so easy to look at the difficulties and just throw up your hands. It's so easy to think, well, maybe it's better someplace else. And
Mhm.
maybe in some cases it is. But
Right.
you know what? I haven't talked to anybody in the industry who doesn't have challenges
That's
historically
right.
and culturally too. But this is ours. And
Yeah.
within ours, I'll just tell this quick story as we wrap up. I had a principal come up to me at the national conference, and he just walked up to me and he said, "Well, I'm wrapping up my, I can't remember, 11th year." Um, he had just gotten promoted to a new position, and he just said, "I just want to say this out loud. All the things that we learn when we come together as leaders about culture and about relationships and about trust, it works. I just want to say it out loud because I have been living it,
Right.
and I keep applying these things and watching them work. And sometimes I think we just need to say that out loud.
Right.
And I was so encouraged by that because and that's what I said to him. I was like, "You're one of those people that when someone says to me, 'Oh, I'm sorry,' I say, 'Have you ever heard that this guy's
Right.
cool?'"
Right.
Because it is being done. There are
Right.
places where every single day principals are showing up and building trust, and their
Right.
teachers are building trust, and their students are learning to build trust. And this is a book that can help you um, build more trust. So,
Right.
Jen, I'm so excited to keep talking about it in the
Good.
weeks
Thank
ahead.
you. Thank you. Yeah, it's fun. You had said before we started recording, wow, this is a really long, thick chapter. And it is. There's a lot in it. So thank you for letting me highlight it.
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, Principal Mentors listeners, as you step into your week, I just want you to remember the trust that you're building is so important, and it all begins with us first. And so we can't invite trust unless we're trustworthy. And so as you're stepping into your week, just give yourself some quick reflection. And Jen, I'm going to use your words for reflection. Are you being honest and straightforward and empathetic? Are you learning not to micromanage others? Are you learning to communicate often and with care? Are you guarding people's privacy and avoiding gossip? Are you connecting well with the people that you're trying to serve and building a rapport? And are you making decisions every day that are protecting students and teachers? Because if you're doing that, you're building trust.
That's right.
And so, all right. Well, Liz, thanks for listening, and I hope you listen to the flagship show on Wednesdays. And until next time, you can always stay connected with our resources at my website at williamdparker.com. And Jen, how can they find you?
They can find me at jenschwanke.com.
Thanks for listening, and thanks for doing what matters. I'll talk to you soon.